Hi everyone, I'm Hayley. I'm always in the craft room and I was all ready to start on my autumn sewing and then the weather turned again and we're having a bit of a nice spell here in the UK. And I had one last summery project cut out and I thought rather than leave it till next year, let's just get on and sew it. It is a Jalie pattern for a men's polo shirt. I'm going to scoot over so that I can insert a picture of the pattern and also what I'm making, because if you know me, you know it's rarely what's actually on the pattern envelope. So this is a men's pattern that I bought to make a top for my husband about 10 years ago. Still haven't done that. And I've just lengthened it into a dress for myself. I figure if I choose a men's size with a chest of 36, that's about my chest size, and this is a knit pattern. I would never expect a bust dart and a knit, so I think it'll be fine for a loose tennis style dress, and hopefully I've also put in a picture of the inspiration. That said, I got the pattern pieces out, which I cut out ages ago, and I'm already slightly confused by the instructions. Jalie, and I love Jalie for the fact that they put their instructions online, whether you buy the pattern or not, you can always read them, which is lovely if they've got an interesting technique or something. But their instructions are written in English and French because they are a Canadian pattern company, and they do all of the writing on one page and all of the diagrams on the other. So it's one of the few pattern companies where I actually print out the instructions. Usually I do instructions on my iPad, but with these, because I need to read the instruction and look at the picture, I don't want to be scrolling back and forth. And now I'm reading the instructions. They don't seem to tell you which pattern piece they're talking about. It's in the drawing, but it doesn't actually say pattern piece A, B, or C. So the very first instruction is to mark the centre front on the, I'm going to call it a dress, even though the pattern is for a top. And I've done that. And then the second instruction is sew 2 guide seams. One 1 centimetre from long edge and another 2 centimetres from short edge, figure 7. And it's only by looking at the figure, the picture, that I can see it's not talking about the front piece anymore. It's now talking about a different piece. And I think that different piece is the front placket. But it doesn't, on the diagram, it doesn't show you what pattern piece it is, and nor does it actually say in words what pattern piece it is. So, I don't know. I feel a bit like I'm guessing here, even though I've got a pattern piece that, a picture that clearly shows a pattern piece that's a rectangle, so it must be these, right? So we're going to sew a guide seam, 1 centimetre from that edge, 2 centimetres from that edge. But first, I need to get the sewing machine out and rethread it green. I have drawn in little stitching lines just because I feel like this needs to be very accurate. Okay, both of those done, and I'm sure I was supposed to do a mirror image. Tell me I was meant to do a mirror image. Of course I was, but just when the instructions don't show both or specify it, I second guess. What's next? The first stitch is the hardest, isn't it? I've kind of been putting that off because I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to make this. Oh, the weather's turning, and now I've done it. I'm just like, yay. Okay, they're all pinned. I sewed down the guide seam, stopping at the intersecting guide seam. So the next instruction is apply adhesive tape to wrong side of front as shown for easier finishing. I don't know what they mean by adhesive tape. Just like literally sticky tape? Or like some kind of stitch witchery type interfacing solution? Honestly, I don't think it's crucial. I mean, it says for easier. We can cope with not easier. Okay. And now it's time to cut into the front. Dun, dun, dun. Well, first I'm going to press that seam open and just make sure that's nice and crisp. This is just so me, but because I didn't want to print off loads and loads of pages and waste paper, I printed everything 2 sheets to a page, and I'm really struggling to see these drawings. So I've been and got my iPad so that I can look at the pictures and also super zoom in. And now I think I understand what I'm supposed to be doing. I couldn't see which ways I was pressing the seam allowance and whether I was covering the seam allowance with the placket, but I think what I'm supposed to be doing is covering it and then tucking it in. So, I know now. I am finding these instructions a little vague though. It says to turn raw edge under and press, but it doesn't say by how much. Now we sewed at 1 centimetre, but I know usually Jalie patterns are a 6mm seam allowance. I know I'm stitching from the right side because it says top stitch, and I know I'm supposed to catch the fold on the back, but there's no photo. If you can hear the kids shouting emergency in the background, they're playing Animal Hospitals, so she needs an ambulance, but not the kind you think, an animal ambulance, which is her sister on a bike with a red cross on her helmet. So all is good. I just can't see where I'm supposed to be top stitching. Is it in the ditch? Or is it supposed to be visible on the right side? I pinned it all from the inside. Then I painstakingly transferred every pin to the outside. Then I went super slowly and I still didn't catch it all. One side I did catch it all. The other side I got like most of it. It's just this little bottom portion. But the next thing I'm going to do is sew across these. So I think it's fine. I might just hand sew that bit. I'm not going to mess with the top stitching because from the front it is straight and it looks really neat. Next instruction is overlap placket pieces, but it doesn't say which one on top. And I do think that might be important for which one opens which way on the other side. Overlap placket pieces stitch across the triangle. Let's look at figure 18. I think it's that way. Does it matter which way the placket opens? And is it different on a men's and a ladies? Let's pin this, flip it, and see how it looks. Well, firstly, I'm glad I pinned that and checked it because no, look at that. That's terrible. That's just terrible. But how is it right way roundish? So that would be with the right side on top, that's how this is. Right side on top, left side under. So theory right, execution tragically terrible. Okay, pinning attempt number 2. Better? Yes. Yes, much better. Not perfect. Shift that over a bit. Okay. Yeah, happy with that. Okay, let's sew that. First attempt, and it's a no from me. This is too far over. I need to scotch. Yeah, that'll be fun to unpick. Attempt number 2. I like it. Can anyone tell me why I didn't baste that first time? I mean, really would have been an obvious place to do a little test stitch. Let's get this pressed. Oh yeah, I'm really pleased with that. And I feel like the hardest part is over now. Also, why is it only at this point in the project that I realise I don't have any buttons? Oops, it just hadn't really occurred to me. Honestly. I wonder if I've got any of these left because it's quite a similar colour. Oh, So now I do have this little triangle and the plackets inside. It doesn't say anything about finishing those. I think I might just whip everything off with the overlocker just across there. It doesn't mention top stitching it down, but I think my instinct is to do a little row of top stitching there. Don't know. Anyway, now the back has a yoke, so I just need to sew the yoke to the main back and then just construct it like a t-shirt. There's like hardly anything to this now. Oh, I'm so pleased I got that done, and I really am very pleased with how neat that turned out. I am going to remove some of these basting stitches because I can see them. So that's the yoke all overlocked. I just need to press the seam allowance up and then I'm going to top stitch it. We top stitch at 3mm and this is definitely a stitch in the ditch foot job. Done, pressed, gorgeous. Right, let's get these shoulder seams sewn and then we can base the side and check if this fit is okay or way off. But first I'm going to tidy up this placket triangle. That's done, and whilst I sew these ends in, let's chat about the big question on this placket: to top stitch or not to top stitch. I do want it to stay where I want it to stay, but the pattern doesn't say to top stitch, and I know patterns are just a suggestion, but also I am one of life's rule followers, so I'm a bit like maybe there's a reason that they don't suggest that you top stitch it. I just feel like if I am going to top stitch it, now's the time, partly because I've got the stitch in the ditch foot on, which will make it neater, but also before I attach front to back, I just think that will be easier because the front is obviously still flat. Okay, I'm really pleased with how that looks from the inside. I don't think it does need top stitching down. I think it's gonna stay where it is of its own accord, so I'm not going to. Got the shoulder seams done, but I am going to set the sleeves in flat before we go any further. That is how the pattern instructions tell you to do it, and it's just easier as well. So I'm going to put those in and then we can baste the side seams and try it on. Well, I just basted one sleeve in by machine, and thank goodness I did do that, and I didn't overlock it first because I was having trouble getting the sleeve to fit in the sleeve head in the shoulder, and I realised why. See this notch? This is on the back yoke piece and this notch is the shoulder. So the notch on the sleeve, I was matching it to the shoulder seam, and I think I should have been matching it to that shoulder notch. I've just done that on the other side and it's made for a much easier installation. Like everything just matches one for one. I'm not massively pulling one, so I think this is correct. The instructions do just say pin sleeve to armhole and stitch. I'm going to base this side. I'm going to mark which one's which. I'm going to do that now, and then I'm going to try it on and see which sleeve looks better. Well, here's the very first kind of initial try on. Side seams aren't done, but just looking at the sleeves, the one with the clip on, this is the one where I matched it to the shoulder notch and not to the seam along the top of the shoulder, and I do think it's better. That seam just looks like a happy seam. This seam looks like a stretched out bunchy seam. Well, no more sewing for me today. It's Sunday and my roast dinner's ready. I'll catch up with you later in the week. Hello and welcome back. I say that it's been like 2 seconds for you, hasn't it? Since last we spoke, I've removed the bad sleeve and put a new one in. Well, I put the same one in again, and I do think that looks an awful lot better. So here's where we're up to, and I must say, I don't know, it's kind of giving Star Trek uniform, some kind of post-apocalyptic disaster movie where the women folk are required to join the army but also not allowed to wear trousers. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm reserving judgment. I would like your opinion on these sleeves though. Tell me what you think. So this is the pattern piece for the sleeve and it is cut on the fold. So identical shape front and back. On the back yoke piece, there is this marking. You can see where I've put my little notch in, shoulder. So what I'm thinking is that because the sleeve is shaped the same, but you do want one to be a longer curve than the other and one to be steeper, by matching the top of the sleeve slightly down the back, that achieves the same thing. Am I on the right lines here, experienced people, or am I just making that up? Look, when I was sewing it, felt like I was doing the right thing, but let me know if you know otherwise. I'm now going to overlock these sleeves in because I'm happy with them, and by the time I read your comments telling me I did it wrong, it will be too late. And then you can see I've got the cover stitch out because I'm going to baste up the side seams and check the fit. Yeah, first try on, and this collar at the moment is definitely giving utilitarian. Don't worry, we're going to sort it out because it has got a collar to actually go on, and then hopefully it will flop a bit and just look more casual and less like I'm in a cult. But the fit I'm happy with. I think this is absolutely fine. It's not loose, it's not tight, it seems just about right. I don't think I want to alter it at all. The only thing I'm not sure about is the armhole seems kind of low. I'm going to have a look in the mirror. Wait there. Is this because this pattern's drafted for men and my bicep is on the dinkier side? I don't know if I could just run that in a bit. I'm going to try on the cover stitch. I've got that threaded with just 2 threads, which does a chain stitch, which is really easy to pull out. So I'm going to do one side, see what we think. So I do think that's an improvement, if not to the looks, because I think it looks very similar. My range of motion is much improved by just bringing that up a bit. I will say I have remembered I don't particularly like short sleeves on me. So maybe we'll be making these a bit more of a cap sleeve later on. I don't know. But anyway, what we were trying to test was the side seam fit, and I'm happy with that. So I am going to replicate this adjustment on that side and overlock. And just to show you what that adjustment looks like on the inside, here is obviously the back of the dress, and you can see where I've just carried the side seam on up into the sleeve, and then ignore that first line, I wobbled off course. So I've taken it in about 1 inch on the double at the arm, and I'm happy with that. I do think it's an improvement. So that was a quick little sewing session today, and that is all I've got time for, and my hair is obviously falling down, but I am really pleased with how this is going. You can't see, but I've had a look in the full length mirror and I do think it's too long, and I do think I would like some little side slits at the bottom. I wish I'd thought of that before I overlocked the side seams, but I didn't, and I have just had a look in the instructions, and you are intended to do a slit at the side seam, and they just tell you to clip into the seam allowance, press one way, and deal with it like that. So that's what I'm going to do. The collar is next, and I do need to have a little dig in the button stash. In fact, shall I do that now? I think this wants something quite plain and sporty. A wooden button would look nice with this colour, but I don't think it suits this style of garment. I've got these little plain plastic ones. I think I cut those off some old ready to wear. I'm going to have a play around and a little think, because this won't be finished until I find some buttons, and if I need to go and pick some up in person, I'd rather do that sooner rather than later. And one last thing, I've just realised that if I need to put buttons on, I need to put buttonholes in, and obviously I actually do need genuine working ones on this garment. I know I usually just sew things through. So I just thought, wouldn't that have been easier to do while the front was flat? I've looked in the instructions, and that is the very final instruction of the whole thing. So buttons and buttonholes were indicated, including on the shoulder tabs. Would that not be easier before things are constructed? I don't love that, Jalie. I could have done the buttonholes before attaching the shoulders and the side seams, and that would just be so much easier. Yeah, and I'm dreading it a little bit just because buttonholes on knits, never the most fun, is it? Hello again, it's another new day, and I've just got like half an hour to nip into the craft room and get something done, and I thought I would spend it interfacing the collar pieces. I have already cut 2 collar stands, which is what I needed, but I've realised I never cut the collar out because I was umming and ahhing about reducing it slightly. However, I've been looking at the inspiration pictures of what's going on in ready to wear at the moment, and the collars do seem pretty big. So I think I'm going to leave it as it is. When I flip it out and pin it on, if I do think it's too much, I might trim it then, but I'm going to start with the original pattern piece. Right, let's get to cutting and interfacing. Okay, that interfacing really does look to be on there good and strong. However, I'm going to leave it, actually I'm going to turn the iron off and then leave it until it's completely cold. I'm not going to touch it, I'm not going to move it, I'm just going to let it cool in situ on the ironing board. But before I go, and I do have to go, I wanted to show you one more quick update, and it's about the buttons. Here is my new mannequin with the dress on it, and I went through the button stash the other day and I found a set of just 3 silver buttons, and they are real metal from what I can tell rather than plastic, and I just think they look great. I was originally going to go for a plastic one. These are simple and look in the same style as like a sporty plastic button, but I just think the silver gives them the edge, kind of leaning into what's the trend at the moment, quiet luxury. So these are the buttons, and the brand on it, I don't know if you can see if I cover my face, is Maine. I do not remember taking these off something. I must have taken them off ready to wear, and I think it will be something of my husband's because I don't remember ever owning anything from a brand called Maine. And in typical us fashion, this could be like some fancy East Coast brand that we bought whilst on holiday in like Nantucket, or it could be some like British high street chains, cheesy and cheap attempt at preppy American style, like Topshop or something. So if you've ever heard of the brand Maine, do let me know which of those things it is. But I'm super pleased with how those look. I'm not looking forward to doing the buttonholes, but you know, one step at a time. We've got the collar interfaced at least, even if that is all I've had time for today. I'm still one step further along, and I will be back with more soon. So it's been a few days and I've been working on this collar installation every evening this week, and I will show you where I'm up to. I'm pretty pleased with my progress. So the collar is on, as is the collar stand. I have not yet top stitched the collar stand, and I will explain why. I had a very near miss with the collar. So obviously you have two collar pieces, one that's interfaced and one that isn't, and the first thing you do is lay them right sides together, sew around and then flip it out. I had my collars on the ironing board and I was looking at the instructions, which showed the collar pattern piece like that. Now obviously you start stitching here, you go up to that corner all the way across and then back down here and stop here. Makes sense, doesn't it? And then you leave this part open. But my pattern pieces were laid like that. And I just kind of glanced at it and went, okay, start here, go up to the top, all the way across down the other side. So I almost sewed the collar the wrong way, leaving this long edge open instead of sewn to go all the way around and then the inner one to go into the collar stand. Luckily, as I took it to the machine, I thought, hang on, that's going to end up with the longer piece open. And I went and checked my notches and realised what I had done. Close one, close one. I would not have enjoyed unpicking that. Anyway, I got the collar sewn right sides together, and then the instructions tell you to trim the corners, grade the seams, flip it out, press it, top stitch it, which I did. My top stitching is passable. It's not my best ever, but it's good enough, it really is. Where I had the trouble was at this corner. So I set off stitching here, sewed up to there, needle down, pivoted and turned it to set off again. And my presser foot just couldn't quite pull it through and get it going. And instead of just pausing and thinking what the actual problem was, which is that the presser foot was unlevel, and therefore putting a hump jumper under it so that it did level it and solving the real problem, I just kind of panicked and was like, oh, the problem is it won't go through. So I just kind of pushed it through and pulled it and hand cranked. So some of my stitches in the corners are a tiny bit shorter than they ought to be. But yeah, I know hump jumpers exist. I have two of them. Why didn't I use them? I don't know. But I am glad that I know now for this collar stand. So, with the collar all assembled, the next instruction was to do with the collar stand. I will read you the instruction. Pin under collar, brackets, not interfaced, to collar stand, interfaced, and stitch. So, to me, well, firstly, I don't need an instruction to pin. That's so redundant. Like, if you need to pin, pin. If you don't need to pin, that's fine, don't pin. But unless you're doing something really unusual, I just don't think you need to specify pinning, especially in instructions this brief. Like, there are not many words to describe how to do this. They're not telling you to press, for example. So why mention pinning? Anyway, pin under collar, not interfaced. So I'm there with the collar and the not interfaced side. Pin to collar stand interfaced. So I'm pinning the not interfaced side to the interface side of the collar stand. And then I'm looking at the diagram. And the diagram seems to imply that you're sewing through both layers of the collar. But to me, pin under collar not interfaced to outer collar stand interfaced and stitch implies you're only going through one layer. Otherwise, I would say something like stitch outer collar stand interfaced to collar with not interface side touching, or specify which one's on top. Do you know what I mean? But because it says pin under collar not interfaced to outer collar stand, I was just going through one layer, leaving the collar open. So if you can imagine, once you've sewn the collar right sides together and flipped it out, you've got a collar that's sewn on 3 sides and there's a kind of pocket. It's open in the middle. So I was pulling that apart and pinning just one side to the collar stand. And then I looked at the diagram and I was like, the diagram's implying it's through both. Would you have interpreted those instructions the same as me, or would you have immediately known it meant through both layers of the collar? I've made collars before, so I'm not coming at this as a collar beginner, so I knew what I was trying to achieve. So I was just looking at it and going, do I need the collar to be open? Do I need access to that pocket to tuck something in? And I was like, no, I don't. The collar is being sandwiched between the 2 collar stands. So I'm sewing one collar stand to the collar, and then I'm going to sew the other collar stand to the other edge and then flip it and enclose the collar. So I was like 90% sure I didn't need access into this collar. So what I did was I basted it, closed through both layers, was like, okay, did the next step, checked, and I was like, yes, I'm correct. Unfortunately, because I'd done the next step and I didn't want to undo it because I'd done it neatly, at no point had I actually sewn the proper seam. It was just a long basting stitch. So I went back in with the machine and I got as far as I could with a normal 2.5 centimetre stitch length. But it does mean that, yeah, I don't know which layer it's even on now, but somewhere in there are some basting stitches that are holding everything together because I just couldn't get that far in. But I didn't want to take off the undercollar that I put on because unpicking a knit is so hard, isn't it? The next instructions are then pin in a collar stand not interfaced, top collar interfaced and stitch as shown. I would personally prefer and stitch along outside edge or stitch along notched edge or something, just as shown. I don't find particularly helpful. If you don't understand the diagram and there's no words to compare it to, you're just stuck then, aren't you? Pin right side of outer collar stand interfaced to right side of neckline and stitch. Now, bearing in mind that when you turn the collar out, it told you to grade the corner seam allowances, there's now no mention of grading or trimming. I've mentioned this before, but what I don't like with brief instructions is when they're inconsistent. If you're going to mention grading and trimming, you need to mention it every time, because if not, when you don't mention it, I'm like, is there a reason that I mustn't trim that? Do I need that seam allowance for later to attach something to? Does it need it for strength and integrity? Either never mention grading and trimming and assume we know we need to do it, or mention it each and every time, because otherwise I second guess. Anyway, I did grade and trim it. I think that was the right thing to do. And I also messed up one other way as I was doing this, and that was with my seam allowances. So Jalie uses 6mm seam allowance, which I actually have a lot of respect for when you're sewing knits, because I usually do construct them on the overlocker. When you're doing this collar stand, they have you press the opposite side seam allowance under by 1 centimetre. And I'm sure this is intentional so that you catch everything when you sew again. I pressed it under by 1 centimetre and then somehow 1 centimetre got lodged in my brain and I sewed everything with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now, I don't think it matters. Possibly because I did everything with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, it's all come out fine. Or perhaps this collar definitely is smaller than it was meant to be, isn't it? But anyway, by the time I realised what I'd done, everything matched, so I decided to just leave it. But yeah, oops. That was totally on me and nothing to do with the instructions. I put both collar stands on, trimmed everything, flipped the inner collar stand, and I just looked at it and thought, I'm never going to be able to top stitch that accurately and catch everything I want to catch. The instruction is just pin it and then stitch it, and I've actually gone in and I was going to just hand basted this inner collar stand down all the way around, I was just going to use some big long stitches, basically in lieu of pins, get it so it all can't shift, and then go in and top stitch it. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I just sew it properly by hand, invisibly, which I have done. So probably if you look really close, you can see it, but it's definitely invisible from the outside. And then that adds an extra layer of security to this end where I've got some basting stitches rather than proper short stitches. So I feel like that is actually really secure. And also now I can hopefully top stitch it without fear. I am trepidatious, not gonna lie, because it's quite lumpy. It's just the nature of the beast, isn't it? There's a lot of seam allowances turned in here, and even with trimming to reduce bulk, yes, that does help, but also it makes lots of steps, because if you grade your seams so that the outer seam allowance that's nearest the edge is the longest, and then slightly smaller and slightly smaller, it looks great from outside, but when you really push it and feel it, there are lots of little steps. So I'm not sure how I'm going to get on with that. Would you leave it and not top stitch it? I don't know that it actually needs it, although that said, these hand stitches are invisible and I'm pleased with them, but also my hand sewing is not the most robust, so I would be worried about it coming undone in the wash. So I've answered my own question. Ignore that. I am indeed going to top stitch it. The other thing I'm going to do now, which is out of order of the instructions, is the buttonholes, because all that's left after that is hemming, sleeves and the dress, and I want to move my spools of thread onto my cover stitch to do the hemming, so it's better to do the buttons and the buttonholes now while my machine is still threaded in the right colour. I'm having a real gripe with this pattern today, aren't I? Where have I put my placket pattern pieces? So the last instruction is to just do all of the buttonholes and the buttons on epaulettes, which I've left off, and also the placket. But I can't see any buttonhole markings. I don't think it's me, but it wouldn't be the first time I've said that, and it was me. So on the epaulette, I can see a buttonhole marking. Doo-doo. Buttonhole. That's upside down, isn't it? So, yeah. Don't know where to put the buttonholes. And ironically, I usually completely ignore buttonhole placements because for a blouse or something, I just always put the first buttonhole that I position in the place of greatest stress, and then I work up and down from there. But with this, they're basically decorative, aren't they? So there is no point of stress. So I don't need to place one very specifically. I just want to put them where I'm told. I just wish there was a line that I could mark, because now I'm going to and ah over that for like an hour, aren't I? Anyway, I'm exaggerating. I'm just ready to be done with this. It's like, it was supposed to be a quick t-shirt dress and it's turned into a bit of a mammoth project. Mainly, I will say, just because I've been very busy. So I've just had little snatches of time here and there. If I'd had like a whole afternoon to dedicate to this collar, it wouldn't have felt like such a task. But as it is, I just feel like I've been chipping away at it for like a week now. So I'm going to go and top stitch this collar stand and do the buttonholes. Wish me luck. Oh my gosh, I'm thrilled with that. I can't believe how well that went. Check out my top stitched collar stand. I did go really slow. I did use my hump jumper, and I thought about which would be the most visible line of top stitching, and I decided it was actually the inside of the garment, because as you've got it on, the collar's probably flopping open a bit. So I actually did it from the inside, and even then I have caught it pretty evenly all the way around with the exception of the very centre back, which will be covered by the collar. Look at that. We all know it's because I put the time into hand stitching it. It made all the difference. It made it easier and neater. And actually, since I have been quite rude about the instructions, I will say that when I checked, Jalie did instruct you in the diagram. You can tell which is the right side and which is the wrong side of the fabric. They told you to do it from the inside so that this is the neatest line. And yes, I 100% agree with that. I'm so pleased with it. Right, it is time to do the buttonholes. But that's given me heart. That was actually really enjoyable. So fingers crossed when I can work out where to position them, that the buttonholes go in just as easily. Hi, so it's still the same day. We've just had a change of top because I was trying this on and I didn't want to keep putting that black dress over my head and getting makeup all over it. So, I mean, I know this is a black band, but I'm wearing that somewhere later. And this is just like throw on and go. That was a lot of explanation for nothing. I have, what have I even done? Oh, I top stitched the bottom of the placket. I know earlier in this video I was like umming and ahhing about whether or not to bother. I decided I would since the top stitching went so well on the collar stand. So why will it not lie flat to show you? I have now just done one line of top stitching there and I pulled the threads through to the back. And then I've been testing buttonholes. And it's not often you'll hear me disparage my Pffaf, but I just tried a stretch buttonhole, stitch number 28 on my Pffaf Ambition 620, and it said it's specifically for buttonholes, and I don't like it at all. I'm going to get out the way so that the camera will focus on this stretch buttonhole, and I just think it looks really messy. It's a zigzag, and yeah, I've cut it open to get a real proper feel for it, and I just think it looks bad. So I'm going to test a different buttonhole stitch. However, I drew out my placket in chalk so that I could work out how to line them up, and I'm glad I did that because yeah, it's in the wrong spot. I want it centered, so I need to shift it over and I'll give it another go. I haven't decided which stitch I'll use, but definitely not number 28. So I'm just going to do stitch number 22, buttonhole for garments. Okay, that's buttonhole number 22 instead. I think that looks much better. Yes, prefer. It is a little bit wobbly, as in it's making the fabric wave a bit, but so was the stretch one. So while I cut this open, please maybe talk about buttonhole chisels. I've heard so many vloggers raving about buttonhole chisels. I'm old school. I put a pin across the end of the buttonhole so that I can't slice through it and then just do it with a quick unpick. But I've heard people raving about chisels, and can you answer a question for me if you have one? Isn't the chisel just always the wrong size? Or do you buy a tiny chisel and then for longer buttonholes you have to move it along and do it a few times? I hope you know what I mean, and if you do know the answer, I would be very interested to know, because yeah, if they're better I'll get one, but I don't know, I'm hesitant. I haven't pressed this yet, so have a little look, and I'm gonna, the iron is playing my song, hang on. Okay, now it's pressed. I definitely think that the non-stretch buttonhole, which is this one, looks better than the stretch buttonhole, which is this one, which is all zigzagged and raggedy. I think that's much neater. Right, buttonhole number 22 it is, and did I get it central? Yes, okay. I need to mark 8mm from the edge of the placket. the first one goes wrong. 2 samples fine, first real attempt. Terrible. Why? Oh, it's done exactly the same thing again. Why? Why does this always happen on the garment and not on the sample? Sample's fine, right. I think we need more fabric behind. Stop that. Cut threads. Right, stitch number 22. I think what the problem is that this is a lump and then there's nothing here. So this piece that I've been sewing the samples on should be a similar thickness. So I'm going to butt it up. Okay. Drop needle. Come on, you can do it. Stop. Nope. Wasn't on the right stitch. Oh my goodness. Oh. Deep breath, deep breath. It's only a buttonhole. Okay. 22. Okay. Let's have a deep breath. Let's have a little drink of water. Stitch number 22. We're not in reverse. Pulled up our bobbin threads. We've got our little thingy pulled down. Drop needle. Press play. Cross. Fingers. Okay, so far so good. So far so good. Come on, turn the corner. Turn the corner. Ish. Did it? Can't tell. Ah. Oh my God. Fail. Yikes. And yet 3 samples have sewn perfectly. We're trying a different buttonhole. Maybe it would be better to do it from this way. Oh, do we think that would be better? Trying again, we're going to mark 8mm from this edge. Of course, right now is the moment I can only find a 30cm ruler. There's nothing like wrong with the machine settings because the samples are coming out fine. I do think it's the challenge of slumpy fabric. That said, if you know where I'm going wrong, please do tell me. I think trying it from this side is a good shout. We'll give it a go. We'll see what happens. What the hell? Such an idiot. I'm on stitch number 122, not 22. Is this attempt number 5? Okay. That's right on target. Stitch number 22. It's working! Okay, attempts number 5 and 6 did work. They're not the neatest buttonholes I've ever sewn, but you know what? They'll do. I'm not putting one up here. I'm never going to use it to put... Sorry, dropped a ruler. I'm never going to use it to put a button through, and I think a bad buttonhole will draw more attention than the lack of a buttonhole, because I know there will be a button on the other side and you'll be like, why is there no buttonhole? But I don't think most people will notice that. Most people probably would notice bad stitching. So I'm going to press these, lick my wounds, make a cup of tea. I've given everything a very liberal application of fray check, and I'm hoping that will be sufficient. I've cut the buttonholes open. I don't think they look terrible. So yeah, and as you knew was coming, that is all I've got time for. So yeah, I still need to sew the buttons on before I can get to the hemming, but we're making definite progress. It's the moment of truth with these buttonholes. I had an absolute nightmare with them yesterday. I cut them open, drenched them in fray check, left them overnight, and yeah, they're terrible, aren't they? There'll be a button covering it. I can't deny I am annoyed about that. Right, time to get these buttons on. Pin the placket closed so that everything matches up nicely, and I'm just gonna try and wriggle through there with some chalk. I've got my 2 buttons, so I'm going to centre them on the placket on those lines, and I'm actually going to tape them on to hold them in place while I sew them. This was a tip I got from Casey of Pattern Scout. I absolutely love her channel. Yep, that looks right. Well, it turns out I was being a bit dramatic, and the buttonholes aren't that bad. That's damp because I realised one of the things I didn't like about it was that I could still see the chalk. So I've got the buttons on. I did 3. I guess the placement, I didn't do one right at the top because I know I'll never use it. And I've left off that buttonhole because who's ever going to notice? Nobody. And I think this was the worst buttonhole, and with a button over it, it's fine, isn't it? So I sewed those on by machine, and now I'm onto the sleeve hemming. I have cut a full 5 centimetre off this sleeve, and I still think it's too long and it needs more. So yeah, in fact I think like half of even what's there now. So I'll get to pinning and then show you what I decide. So here is my finished dress. I've got to say, now that it's all done, I really do like it. I don't know that it's love, but I think it will be a really useful throw and go dress with bare feet and sandals in the summer, and in the spring and autumn with leggings and trainers. I have now got over the buttonhole debacle, and I think that overall it's a decent collar and it's all looking neat. I'm going to clip this on so that I can show you the sleeves. I'm really pleased I did decide to shorten these sleeves to a cap. I think they look much better. I will say this started off as a menswear pattern, and I think it's worked fine lengthened to a dress. The one thing that I would change if I made this again is the depth of the armhole. I think because this was drafted for a man's shape and probably heftier biceps than mine, you can see my bra, or in today's case my thermal vest. I do think that overall, for a menswear pattern that I just lengthened because I had it on hand, the fit I've achieved is actually pretty good, but honestly, that is more fluke than skill. I hope you enjoyed sewing with me this week, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye. Hello. Anyway, I'm going to stop my complaining. Editing Hayley just cut this whole rant. Dear oh dear. So I'm going to take this one off, redo it the same as this one, then overlock both of them on. Collar. Oh. Wow, that's a lot of mascara. Have I been actually sweating? Oh my God.